I'm Clara, 32, a stay-at-home mom. Let me tell you about the worst period of my life that began 2 years ago. It was a time when my world, already rocked by a tragedy, got hit by a betrayal so deep it almost broke me. Life back then was simple, revolving around my 4-year-old, Jamie, and my husband, Mark. Mark was always neck-deep in work, managing stuff for a company with branches everywhere. But the real anchors of my life were my in-laws, Sarah and John. They weren't just in-laws, they replaced my parents. It was during this period, my own folks died in a nasty car crash. It was a gut punch, the kind that leaves you gasping for air and struggling to stand. I was a mess, a complete wreck. That's when Sarah and John stepped in. They weren't just in-laws, they became my lifeline. "Clara, we're here for you, always," John had said, his voice steady but his eyes wet. He was a tough guy, but he had a heart of gold. Sarah was softer, always had a hug ready. "You're our daughter now, more than ever," she'd whisper as she held me while I sobbed. They helped with Jamie, took care of the house, basically kept me from falling apart. But just when I thought I'd hit rock bottom, life decided to throw me another curveball. It was Lisa, a family friend, who broke the news to me. She's blunt, always has been. "Clara, listen, I hate to be the one to say this, but there's talk about Mark. They say he's seeing someone else." I remember laughing it off at first. "That's bullshit, Lisa. Mark wouldn't, he just wouldn't." But deep down, a part of me knew. When Mark came home that night, I confronted him straight up. "So, what's this crap I'm hearing about you screwing around, Mark?" He didn't even have the guts to look me in the eye. "Clara, it's not what you think," he mumbled, but I knew better. I felt like I was getting sucker punched all over again. First, my parents, now this? It was like some sick joke. That's where my story starts. In the middle of a life that felt like it was crumbling around me. 2 years ago, I lost my parents and then had my heart ripped out by the man I thought I knew. Welcome to my mess. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of me, when Mark walked in. His face was a picture of guilt, but I was past caring. "So, you're a cheat now, Mark? Is that it?" I spat the words out, not caring about the venom in them. Mark flinched, but he deserved it. "Clara, it's not that simple," he said, trying to sound reasonable, but to me, he just sounded pathetic. "Not simple? You screw around while I'm crying over my dead parents, and you say it's not simple?" My voice was shaking with rage. He sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I was stressed, Clara. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I laughed, but it was bitter and hollow. "Didn't mean anything? You shattered our family, Mark, and you say it didn't mean anything?" He tried to reach out to me, but I jerked away. "Don't. Just don't. How long, Mark? How long have you been lying to me?" He hesitated, and that was all the answer I needed. "It started a few months ago. Clara, I'm sorry. I really am." The word sorry stung. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Mark. You've broken us." I couldn't stay in the same room as him. I walked out, leaving him standing there, looking like a man who knew he'd screwed up beyond repair. Later, I went over to Sarah and John's place. I needed someone to talk to, and they were the closest thing to parents I had. Breaking the news to them was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I sat them down in their cozy living room, the place where I'd spent countless happy hours. "Sarah, John, I have to tell you something about Mark." Their expressions changed from warmth to concern. "What is it, dear?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with worry. "It's Mark, he's been having an affair." Saying the words out loud made them real, and it hurt like hell. John's face turned to stone, his hands balled into fists. "That blackguard," he growled. "After everything we've been through, he does this to you." Sarah was crying, her hands trembling. "Oh, Clara, how could he? We thought he was better than this." I couldn't hold back my tears. I don't know what to do. I feel so lost. John stood up, pacing the room. I'll talk to him. I'll make sure he knows what a colossal mistake he's made. If he does something like that again, I will disinherit him. But I wasn't sure there was anything to be said or done. The trust was broken, and I didn't know if it could ever be mended. The days after finding out about Mark's affair were a mess of emotions. I was angry, hurt, and felt betrayed. But in the middle of that storm, Mark was desperate, almost pathetic, begging for another chance. One evening, he cornered me in the living room, his face worn out with guilt and fear. "Clara, please, I'm begging you. I know I messed up, big time. But I can't lose you and Jamie over this." I looked at him, feeling a mix of anger and pity. "You should have thought about that before jumping into bed with someone else, Mark." He winced, as if my words were physical blows. I know. It was a stupid mistake. I never meant to hurt you." "Mistake?" I scoffed. "You called destroying our family a mistake?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he had. "I'm not trying to make excuses. I want to make things right. Please, Clara." I wanted to scream, to tell him how much he had hurt me, but instead, I found myself thinking of Jamie, our little boy who adored his dad. "Mark, you don't just get to come back and pretend everything is fine. You broke something here," I said, my voice heavy with unspoken pain. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix it, if you let me," he pleaded. I sighed, feeling the weight of the decision on my shoulders. "I'll think about it, Mark. But even if I agree, things will never be the same again." He nodded, looking like a man who knew he was hanging by a thread. "I understand. Thank you, Clara." The next day, I talked to Sarah and John about it. I needed their perspective, their advice. John was furious, his old-school values making it hard for him to see past the betrayal. "Clara, you can't just let him off the hook. He needs to learn his lesson." Sarah was more understanding, though her disappointment in her son was clear. "Clara, dear, whatever decision you make, we'll support you. But think about Jamie, and what's best for him." Their words echoed in my head as I made my decision. I wasn't doing this for Mark. I was doing it for Jamie, and maybe, a little bit, for the memory of what Mark and I used to have. That night, I told Mark my decision. "I'm willing to give this another shot, Mark. But things need to change. We need to start over, rebuild what you broke." Mark's relief was palpable. "Anything, Clara. I'll do whatever it takes." 2 years had passed since I decided to give Mark another chance. It felt like walking on a tightrope every day, balancing between the past and a future I wasn't sure about. Mark got a promotion at work, which meant more business trips, more time away from home. It left me with Jamie and a lot of time to think. One day, while Jamie was at school, I sat with Sarah and John in their garden, a place where we had shared so many family moments. "Clara, you've been holding up well, considering everything," Sarah remarked, her voice laced with concern. I forced a smile. "I'm trying, Sarah. For Jamie's sake." John, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "You know, Clara, I still can't wrap my head around what Mark did. But I respect you for giving him another chance." I sighed, looking at the garden's blooming flowers. "I don't know if it was the right decision, John. Sometimes, I feel like I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop." "We're here for you, no matter what," Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I appreciated their support, but deep down, I felt alone. Mark's frequent travels didn't help. Whenever he was home, it was like living with a stranger. We talked, but it was mostly about Jamie or mundane things. One evening, I decided to confront Mark about this distance between us. He had just returned from a trip and was sitting in the living room, scrolling through his phone. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway. He looked up, a hint of weariness in his eyes. "What's up?" "It's about us." I feel like we're just coexisting, not really living as a couple, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark put his phone down, his expression turning serious. Clara, I'm trying. I'm working hard for us, for our family. But is that enough, Mark? We hardly talk, and when we do, it's like we're just going through the motions, I replied, frustration creeping into my voice. He stood up, coming closer. I know it's been hard, Clara, but I'm doing the best I can. I shook my head. I'm not sure if your best is enough anymore. We stood there, the distance between us more than just physical. I wanted to believe that we could get back to where we once were, but as each day passed, that hope faded a little more. Life in the Smith household had settled into a routine, a mundane pattern of day-to-day activities, with Mark frequently away on business trips and me juggling household chores and caring for our son Jamie. The joy and spontaneity that once filled our home seemed to have evaporated, leaving behind a sense of mechanical existence. One afternoon, while visiting Sarah and John, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. We were sitting in their cozy living room, sipping tea and chatting about trivial matters, when Sarah, ever the attentive mother-in-law, gave me a curious look. Clara, dear, you've been looking a bit pale lately. Everything all right with your health? Sarah's tone was laced with genuine concern. I forced a smile, not wanting to worry her. Oh, I'm fine, Sarah. Probably just a bit tired from running around after Jamie. She wasn't convinced and leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. You're not, by any chance, expecting, are you? Her question caught me off guard, and I laughed it off. No way, Sarah. That's definitely not on the cards right now. However, her words planted a seed of doubt in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my recent tiredness and nausea could be signs of pregnancy. On my way home, I made a detour to the pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The next morning, after Jamie had left for preschool, I took the test. The minutes I spent waiting for the result felt like hours. When I finally looked at it, the 2 pink lines were as clear as day. I was pregnant. I was still reeling from the shock when Mark returned from his latest business trip. He looked weary, his suit crumpled and his eyes tired. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to tell him the news. Mark, we need to sit down. There's something important I need to tell you, I said, my voice trembling slightly. He frowned, a look of concern crossing his face. What's wrong, Clara? Is it Jamie? No, it's not Jamie. I'm pregnant, I said, watching him closely for his reaction. He stood there, stunned, as if trying to process what I'd just said. Then, slowly, his expression shifted to one of confusion and concern. Pregnant? Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. I took a test this morning, I replied, feeling a knot form in my stomach at his less than enthusiastic response. Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of unease. Wow, that's great news. It's just so unexpected. His words lacked conviction, and I felt a pang of disappointment. I thought you'd be happier, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He quickly tried to reassure me. I am happy, Clara, really. It's just a lot to take in right now, with everything going on at work. I nodded, trying to mask my disappointment. The joy of discovering my pregnancy was overshadowed by the growing distance between us. The following day, I shared the news with Sarah and John. Their reaction was heartwarmingly different. Sarah's eyes lit up with joy, and she enveloped me in a warm embrace. A new grandchild. Oh, Clara, this is such wonderful news, she exclaimed, her voice brimming with excitement. John's reaction was equally enthusiastic. This is a blessing, Clara, a beautiful addition to our family. Their happiness was infectious, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to bask in the joy of the new life growing inside me. The joy of expecting was tinged with the bittersweet realization that the child would be born into a family where the parents were more like strangers than partners. The mix of emotions was overwhelming, leaving me to wonder about the future of our family. The days at home had turned into a never-ending cycle of monotony, with Mark always off on some business trip or another, leaving me to handle everything alone. It was during one of these dull, repetitive days that my in-laws, John and Sarah, decided to shake things up. I was over at their place, mechanically sipping tea while Jamie was playing with his toys, when John dropped a bombshell. "Clara, you're going to Hawaii. It's all sorted," he announced, like he was talking about a trip to the local grocery store. I nearly spat out my tea. Hawaii? Now? But Mark, he doesn't even know. John's response was blunt and to the point. "Forget about Mark. He's got his own stuff. This is about you and Jamie getting some much-needed fun." Sarah nodded in agreement, her expression serious. "You've been cooped up in that house for too long, Clara. A change of scenery will do you good." I tried to argue, to reason, but they weren't having any of it. I couldn't even reach Mark to tell him about the trip. Calls went straight to voicemail, and my texts disappeared into the void, unacknowledged, unread. So, there we were, Jamie and me, heading off to Hawaii on a whim, thanks to my in-laws, with Mark completely in the dark. The whole thing felt like a crazy dream. Landing in Hawaii felt surreal. The hotel was like something from a postcard, exactly how Sarah had described it. "It's a family tradition," she had said. Jamie was ecstatic, his laughter and energy contagious. But as I watched him play, a pang of loneliness hit me. "Why isn't Daddy here, Mommy?" Jamie asked, his innocent question twisting the knife a bit more. "He's busy, baby," I replied, keeping my voice light. "But we're going to have a great time, just us." Every night, I'd send updates to Mark, photos of Jamie building sandcastles, the stunning Hawaiian sunsets, but they went unanswered. His silence was a loud, echoing confirmation of the growing gap between us. The days were a blur of beach outings and hotel adventures with Jamie, yet I felt disconnected, my mind constantly wandering back to Mark. Then came the shocker. On our penultimate morning, I walked down to the hotel lobby, and there he was. Mark. And he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, someone I didn't recognize, laughing at something he said. I froze, my heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not in the very place Sarah and John had cherished. The shock was like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe my eyes. The moment I saw Mark with that woman, my world stopped. Panic gripped me as I grabbed Jamie's hand, rushing him back to our hotel room. He was babbling about the pool and the fun he had, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. Once in the room, I quickly got Jamie settled with his favorite toys and stepped out onto the balcony, dialing a number with trembling fingers. "I need you here in Hawaii," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, trying to keep the desperation at bay. I spent the rest of the day on that balcony, like a sentinel watching over a battlefield. Below, Mark and his mistress were living it up, oblivious to the pain they were causing. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice as I watched them laugh, touch, and share moments that were meant to be mine. That night, sleep was a stranger. My mind was a whirlwind of hurt and anger, replaying the scene over and over. The betrayal felt raw, cutting deep into the core of what I believed our life together was. The next morning, I left Jamie with the sitter and made my way to the hotel restaurant, where I saw Mark and the woman having breakfast, still in their little bubble. I marched up to them, fury coursing through my veins. "Mark, what the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. Mark's head snapped up, and the color drained from his face. "Clara, this isn't what it looks like. Don't insult me. I'm not blind," I shot back, glaring at the woman beside him. She looked uncomfortable, fidgeting in her seat. "Who are you?" I asked her, my voice icy. She stuttered, her eyes darting between me and Mark. I'm Lisa, I didn't let her finish. "Well, Lisa, you've been sleeping with my husband. Congratulations." Mark tried to intervene. "Clara, please, let's not do this here." "Why not?" Mark. Afraid of a little scene? I challenged, my voice dripping with scorn. The woman, Lisa, quickly stood up, mumbling an apology before scurrying away. Mark reached out to me, his eyes pleading. Clara, I can explain. Please, just don't tell my parents. As if on cue, John and Sarah walked into the restaurant. Seeing the scene, they quickly pieced things together. Mark's face turned ashen. John's voice was cold and hard. What's going on here, Mark? Mark stammered. Dad, I can explain. Sarah looked from Mark to me, her expression one of shock and hurt. Clara, what's happened? I took a deep breath, the weight of the betrayal heavy on my chest. Mark's been having an affair. I caught them together. The words hung in the air, heavy with disappointment and pain. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. John's face was a mix of anger and disbelief. John was the first to speak, his voice laced with a bitterness I had never heard before. Enough of this nonsense, Mark. We're tired of your antics. You've pushed us too far this time. Sarah stood beside him, her expression one of utter disappointment. We've stood by you through everything, but this is unforgivable. Mark, looking like a deer caught in headlights, tried to appeal to them. Mom, Dad, please. But John cut him off. No, Mark. We're done. You're out of the house. It belongs to us, and we won't harbor a cheater under our roof. And as for the inheritance, don't expect a dime. Mark's face crumpled. He looked from his parents to me, a desperate plea in his eyes. Clara, please. I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. It's over, Mark. I'm filing for divorce. The trip back from Hawaii was a blur. Once home, I set the wheels in motion for the divorce. The proceedings were quick, but every signature, every paper served was a reminder of the life I thought I'd have. The court granted me alimony for both Jamie and our unborn daughter. Mark was ordered to provide for both children, his actions leaving him alone and distanced from the family he once had. When our daughter was born, a beautiful baby girl, it was a bittersweet moment. She was a symbol of a new beginning, but also a reminder of everything that had fallen apart. Throughout it all, John and Sarah were my pillars of strength. They helped with the kids, giving me the support I desperately needed. You're not just our daughter-in-law, Clara. You're our daughter, and we'll be here for you and the kids, Sarah would often say, her kindness a soothing balm on my wounded heart. Life settled into a new routine. Raising 2 kids alone was challenging, but with John and Sarah's help, it was manageable. We became a close-knit unit, bound by love and mutual respect, a stark contrast to the broken family we once were. Mark became a distant figure, an occasional visitor in the kids' lives, but the warmth and closeness we once shared were gone, replaced by a polite, distant co-parenting arrangement. As I watched my children play in the yard, John and Sarah sitting nearby, chatting and laughing, I realized that this was my new normal. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life filled with love and support. In the end, that was all that mattered.